Hello everyone, welcome to this API Gateway tutorial where we are going to see how to work with Kong and Kong KONNECT. So who am I? My name is Rajesh Padansinga. I've been a software engineer for about 10 plus years now, and I've mostly been a Java developer, a Kotlin developer, and I've been working a lot in the cloud as well. I've been an owner of the Just Protect channel for about a year, thus the channel that you are looking at the moment. And of course, I am a Kong champion. The Connect Gateway Manager comes with a Gateway Manager by default. This Gateway Manager can control different control planes, and each individual control plane can control different data node planes. A data node plane is nothing other than the API gateway for our applications. It is usually a running container on a VPN that provides an open port to the outside world where we can serve our applications. So here we are in the login page of Kong KONNECT. If we use our Google account, we can log in very easily and we can see the main page. But first, let me show you the website that we are going to use as if it was our own. This is the famous pet shop store, and it is online and anyone can use it and it's public. This is what we are going to protect with our API gateway in this exercise. The good thing about the pet shop store is that we have access to all kinds of methods, getters, putters, we can do post requests, we can delete. And so we have a broad variety of things that we can test out. And if we use a tool like Insomnia, which is similar to Postman, if you are used to using Postman, we can always check this application very easily. And here, for example, I have a request for a certain pet, and then we get the details of that pet. One of the details is the URL. And if we look for it and click on it, we can see this nice dog. So this is part of, this is the application that we are going to test as part of our examples. So now let's have a look at the Gateway Manager. And there we are going to find a control plane. And in the control plane, we will be able to add a new data plane node. So let's do just that. And in it, Connect gives us immediately an example on how to create a container with the certificates we need so that we can connect from our local machine to Connect. This will be running in our Docker environment locally, and the difference between what we should do in production and what we're going to do now is that we are going to protect a public website. This is so that I don't have to create a container specifically to make these demonstrations that we are going to see. So this makes it easier for me and makes it easier also to explain the examples. But for now, let's just run this container. Once the container has finished its startup, it will start running and Connect will provide us immediately with a confirmation that the connection has been established. And we see here that it is waiting for a new data plane node. And there we go. It's already been connected. So now if we go back, we will see that we have a connected node. And we can now start making our service. So what is a gateway service? A gateway service is a service that is used to refer to a website. In it, we configure the website's URL where the data traffic is going to, the protocol, the timeouts for read, write, and connection, and the number of retries. So at its basis, a gateway service is just a way for us to find out the website we want to protect. And speaking of the service, we are now configuring it with the name PetStore service. And we can add some tags to it in the respective fields. And of course, the field that we are interested in is the upstream URL field. And there is where we will put the URL of our website. But for that, we need to know exactly which URL we want to put and which one is the most ideal in our situation. So it's good to find out exactly what's important. For example, if we check on the URL, we can see different segments of the URL, and those are different paths that we can choose. We need to select actually a route that can suit our needs. So here, what I am checking is basically where would that route path be. So I can see, for example, here in the GET request that I could go up to v2. So pstoreswagger.io/v2. This seems to be the best URL to pick, because then it's just a question of adding the rest to the paths that we want to choose. So this is now our URL. We save it. And now we can add a new route. And the route is exactly where we want to hit our website. And we can define many routes. And the reason for defining routes in this case, and if you notice, I've already put the name pet route. So I'm really prefixing everything with pet route. So the paths that we are choosing is essentially to provide different configuration to different paths. So if we have, in this case, the path pet, means that every path pet can have an independent configuration than other paths that we can use in this URL. So now we are just adding paths to our gateway service, and we can add multiple paths to our gateway service. It is also important to add a / prefix to the path, because otherwise it will not accept in the configuration that path. Now that we have our gateway service configured with the URL and one path, we can now test and see if we can reach our application via our local host, our gateway, on port 8000. And if we do that with http://localhost:8000, we should be getting our PetStore. But instead, we do get an error response. And this has to do with our path, which is not correctly configured. I don't know if you've noticed, but we have a small problem. We've configured path with pet. So pet in this context means that we're going to access to the v2 endpoint, but not exactly the path where pet is. So to do that, we need to go back to our configuration and change where in the service we have the URL that ends in v2, make it end in pet, so that pet goes to pet as expected. So like this, we add PET at the end, and then we have our routes fixed. And if we go back to Insomnia and remove one of the pet paths, then we should be able to get, there we go, the result of our pets in the PetStore. And now all we are missing is a consumer, which we will now create. We need a consumer to access the website and go through our gateway. So our consumer will have a username, so that I just put in the username field, and then I just create a custom ID, which I call JESPE. And I can put on my tags optionally, and I have now my consumer ready. And we are now ready to talk about our first example. So our first example will be about basic authentication. Basic authentication is not really advised to use in production, but it's the perfect example to give an introduction on how to configure plugins for authentication in Kong KONNECT. It's easy, it's very simple to understand, and essentially we are just going to create a username password that it's going to allow us to access the gateway via a base64 encrypted combination of user:password. And when we send that, we are able to access our website. Okay, so now we should configure our authentication. And for that, we pick up the basic authentication plugin from the plugins options. And then we can pick scoped. We could have always left the global option, but to understand how can we affect the several areas of authentication, let's just pick manually our service and our route. Our service is the PetStore service, and we can search for it. And the same goes to the route. We can pick the pet route, and it will find it for us, and then we can select it. We should call our instance name something. In this case, let's just call it Pet Basic Authentication. And we can also add some tags to our plugin. It's just an extra part of configuration, can be useful for searches. And finally, we may want to hide the credentials, because if we don't do that, the credentials that we use to access our website will be forwarded via the Kong gateway to the service we are opening in our web browser. But this was just a configuration of the plugin. We still need to add this configuration to our consumer. So the consumer must be able to be authenticated. And that is the reason why I created a consumer, because that's the way to access the API gateway and therefore our website. So what we need to do is to select our consumer. And when we do that, we can then choose which kind of credentials we want to use. And so if we select credentials, we have different options. The one we need to select is basic authentication. And here we can add a new basic auth. And here, of course, we just select our password and we select our username. Now, the password and username are fields. They are not immediately or directly related to the consumer. So this username is not the consumer name. And the password, we put it like this in the clear. It never gets shown anywhere else. But this is how we establish the user name password to be able to access our website. And if we now go to Imsonia and we try to access the same website directly, we get a message unauthorized. However, if we add our authentication token by means of the authentication header, which is something provided by Imsonia, it will already allow us to send the username password via the encrypted base64 token. And then if we make this request again to our website, we will see that we get an OK message. It's taken a bit long. There we go. We have the response of the service because we have been successful in authenticating with our user and our password. Now that we have successfully configured the basic authentication for our gateway, we are now going to use another form of authentication to do that. That is the API key authentication. We are going to use it in exactly the same way as we used the basic authentication, only that in this case we were going to configure another completely different plugin. Now that we have completed the configuration of the basic authentication, it's time to have a look at another one. This is the key authentication for Kong. The key authentication bases its authentication on a key that it has to be present on every request sent to the gateway, which could be in the form of a header. The API key is to be used with a header of the same name, and the requests to the gateway needs to be accompanied by this API key. So let's learn how to configure this. Before we start performing the configuration of the API key authentication, we need to make sure that we don't have any leftovers of the previous exercises. And now that we are checking in the service and everywhere else, we don't see anything extra configured, so we can just add new plugin and we add key authentication. The key authentication we can configure exactly the same way as the basic authentication. At this point, we select the service and the route we want to configure, and then we can give our instance a name. In this case, this instance would be static pet, and it will be PetKey API. And that's it. We can accept the default configuration. And as we do that, we now need to make sure that our consumer is assigned a key API. Because now it does not have it, and we are not sending any API key. And as you can see in the request, we did not get any successful authentication. So let's add that key authentication to our consumer. And we have two fields, key and tags. We can add tags if we want, we don't have to. And key, we don't need to fill it in, because when we don't fill it in, it gets automatically created for us. Just as you see now on the left, there's a key already created, and here's the key created that we will need if we want to make requests to our web service. So if we copy the key and put it into a header in our request, we can add it here at API key and then add the key to it, and then we see already that it's making a request, and that we have the successful request made with the API key as a param in the request to our gateway API. And as a preparation for the next exercise, we will move our plugin, and we also will want to remove the credential assigned to the consumer. So we can come back to the place where key authentication is configured, and there just delete the key authentication, and we are ready for the next exercise. Now that we have covered the API key authentication, let's now have a look at the JWT authentication. The JSON Web Token authentication relies simply on actually the same principle as the other two. We just send some payload with some protected element to it, and then we can access our website. In this case, it's a JWT authentication token that will contain an ISS which will identify it, and it will be signed, and our service will have to be able to recognize that so that it gives us access to the website we are opening with our browser. So let's start. Let's configure our plugin now. So we'll go to the list of plugins and select our JWT token, and we can now configure it either globally or scoped. We will choose scoped as usual, and we will pick our gateway service, PetStore service, and our route, pet route. And then, of course, we need to give it an instance name. Let's just say pet JWT token, just to give it a name. And let's just give them some tags. And we can also configure other things in this token. We can configure extra claims, give some cookie names, some header names. We can change all of this stuff. But what we are mostly interested in is in the key claim name. This is what the JWT token algorithm will use to identify the JWT token. And this will happen after we verify the signature, which is something that we'll also need to do for our consumer. Now, as you may have guessed, now that we have our plugin configured, we need to configure our consumer so that it can have an authentication associated with it. So let's go to our consumer and select JWT credentials, add a new credential, and then everything should be configurable by default. We don't need to set up anything. We could customize it, but there is no need. It will automatically create the ID and it will automatically create the secret for our token. And this is where they are now. So these were automatically configured for us and created and generated for us. And we are now able to use them in our requests. And just to give a small example, if we remove all the authentication of our request, we can see that we get an unauthorized response. And this is, of course, because we are missing our bearer token for the JWT token. To create it, we can use jwt.io. This is a public website, so it is not advisable to use it in production, but we can use it fairly easy for our tests. So in this case, we just need to add our ISS claim to the payload of our request so that we can identify our token. But we also need to sign it. And if we try to make this request without signing, what will happen is that we will get a response saying invalid signature. It doesn't mean anything if the token has the correct information or not. If it's not signed, we will not be able to read it. So to sign it, we just need to sign it with our secret. And if we generate a new encoded request with this, we generate a new JWT token that then we can use in our request. And now it should be successful. And was it taking long? Probably because it's and it's successful. And then we get our pet from our PetStore using JWT authentication algorithm. So this concludes the simple basic configuration for our JWT token. And of course, as a standard, let's just delete all the configuration. We can delete the credentials, and then we can proceed to delete the plugin. The order doesn't really matter. Important is that we can leave everything clean for the next exercise. The three authentication mechanisms that we have seen so far are very simple to configure. There are more elaborate ones. One of them is the OAuth 2. The OAuth 2 authentication mechanism can be configured in Kong KONNECT using the OAuth 2 Introspection plugin. This plugin is used to configure where the OAuth 2 server is and the introspection URL. So the way it works is very simple. We make an initial request to our OAuth 2.0 server. It gives us back a token, and with that token, we can access our web application. That token first gets tested if it is valid or not, if it has expired or not, and it gives back a response to tell us what to do with it. OAuth 2 Introspection is one plugin that we can use, but we can also use the OpenID Connect plugin, which is even more elaborate, and probably because of that is even safer to use. Now, these two plugins are somewhat more complicated and require much more explanation, so they fall a bit out of the scope of this video. So I'm just mentioning them so that you know that they exist and that I'm probably going to make a video about them. And in the meantime, there are already videos about this on the YouTube platform. I will put the links to those videos in the description of this video. And for now, these are all the plugins that I wanted to present to you regarding authentication. And this should give you an easy step into further expand your knowledge on authentication. Now, let's have a look at another aspect of protecting our applications, and that is rate limiting. In the next exercise, we are going to have a look at the rate limiting plugin. This plugin allows us to limit the amount of requests that are going to reach our gateway. This is important to protect our application against one form of attack called the distributed denial of service attack. What this attack can potentially do to our services is to stop them from functioning and force them to shut down. And with this rate limiting plugin, we can successfully prevent that from happening. So let's configure it. So let's configure our rate limiting plugin. For that, we need to select it first from the list of plugins, and we can filter it. And if we search for rate limiting, we will find two. One is the rate limiting and the other is the rate limiting advanced. We pick the latter and we configure it in a scoped way by selecting our gateway service and our route. In this instance, we are going to tell our plugin that the limit of requests that we are allowed to receive are just 2, and that we can put in the field limit. And we are also going to configure a window to count these requests, which will be of 5 seconds in the window size field. After saving this, we can now test it in Insomnia, our requests to our gateway. We can make a couple of them without rate limiting because that is being configured after being enabled. So when we enable the plugin, we may be able to send an extra request. Here we've sent already enough in 5 seconds, and now there are too many requests. If we wait for 5 seconds, the counter starts back and we can make an extra 2 requests within that time window. After that, we only get the API rate limit exceeded response. But now let's look at a curious case. If we select a consumer, what would you expect to be the behavior when we send our request via Insomnia to our API gateway once we configure it this way? So now we have enabled it. It will behave still like before. So API rate limit exceeded as the first response, but now we are getting all okays when we send the request. It seems as if the rate limiting plugin is not doing anything anymore while being activated at the same time. The reason for this is that we have not configured any authentication method to access our application in this case. So there is no consumer being identified in our gateway, and therefore these are only anonymous requests, which means that the rate limiting does not work in that case. And if we roll back our changes, we will realize that the rate limiting is back. Again, sometime to reconfigure the plugin, but we see now that we do get rate limit exceeded error responses every 5 seconds. So this concludes this segment of this tutorial to learn about how to work with a rate limiting plugin. And now we can move on to the next exercise where we will see how to work with ACL lists and establish permissions for specific users and areas of our application. To be able to use the ACL plugin, we will also need some form of authentication. In this example, we are going to use the API key, and after that, we are going to configure the ACL plugin. It is important to understand that we need to identify the consumer that is using our application, and that a consumer can only exist if it is configured and if it is authenticated in the API gateway. So let's get into it. Before we configure our ACL plugin, it is very convenient if we already can assign our consumer with some groups. So we now just created a key authentication, which is something we have seen before, but now we can also add an ACL. And adding an ACL means that we are going to create a group for our consumer, and we'll call it pet group. And this is important for the next steps. Before we configure the ACL plugin, we of course need to configure some sort of authentication, and this will be the API key in this case. As we have already seen how that works, I will just fast forward and start at where we need to configure the ACL plugin. So let's configure our ACL plugin. To do that, we go, of course, to the list, we filter it, and we select the ACL plugin. And there we might want to try to save it, but it will not let us because we need to specify allow or deny rules. So let's, for now, specify the pet group as an allow group. And that means that only this group will be able to have access to the website via the Kong gateway. So let's see how that works in Insomnia. If we send the request, we will see that we have access, and then we can see the results. But if we put that group in the deny rule, by removing it from the allow and putting it into the deny group, then the expectation is that we are not going to be able to access the website. So let's see if that works. We should get an error. And that's exactly what we get. We get you cannot consume this service, which means that our pet group now has access denied to access this path in this group. And of course, we can also specify this, and we can select the gateway service and the route. So these are things that we know already that are possible. And if we test that in our application, in Imsonia, then we should be able to still see that we are not allowed to access our website. And now if we put the pet group back again to the allow rule and save this, then we should be able to access our website again. Let's try a couple of times, and there we go. That in the beginning is always something that happens with the plugins. It takes sometimes a few seconds to get everything correctly configured. Now we just clean up and we wrap up our tutorial. So these are all exercises meant to show you how to configure some very important aspects of web applications security with Kong KONNECT. And now let's have a look at a short summary of what we have seen so far. As we come to the end of this video, please remember to shut down your data plane nodes. You will be able to find them if you know how to use Docker with the Docker ps-a command, and you will see all the containers still running, and make sure that you have them stopped. What could happen is that if you leave them on and they start again, they will connect again to Connect, and perhaps that's not something that you are interested in letting happen. To finalize our video, is also important to say in a few words what we actually are expected to be concerned about when trying to secure a web application, and it is quite a handful. So for the first and foremost, we need to provide authentication. This is a very obvious thing. We also need to provide authorization. If our users are able to access everything and there is no control over what they can actually see or do, then the application is a little bit less secure. We also need to control the rate limiting with the rate limiting plugin or other plugins that Kong has to offer. And this is to make sure that we don't allow too many requests coming to our application, because of course that could also come in the form of a DDoS, distributed denial of service attack, and that's not what we want. And finally, 3 aspects that this presentation didn't cover because they are very complex subjects and they need a video on their own. The number 4 is login, auditing, and monitoring. This is important because we need to have a record of what has happened in our application as much as possible and be able to detect when things seem to be going wrong or otherwise suspicious. Number 5, we have data encryption. If we are communicating with our website in a public domain via the internet, we want to make sure that the data is encrypted and that there is no way, or at least we make it very difficult for a hacker to eavesdrop on what we are sending. And finally, number 6, we need to make sure that our API gateway is constantly updated, and that is something that we can also do with our Kong KONNECT. Kong KONNECT will make sure that our gateways are updated, and that when we need to deploy nodes, those nodes will take the configuration that is available in Kong KONNECT. Kong KONNECT provides all the plugins that the Kong Gateway provides, and there are several of them. In terms of authentication, there's a lot more than what I've discussed in the video. As you can see here, we have the OAuth 2.0 introspection and OpenID Connect that I mentioned, but there's also other things like LDAP and mutual TLS authentication. So there are quite a lot of things. We also have security plugins that can provide different kind of interesting security measures for our application. For example, here we have encryption also. We can configure cores, for example. There are many things that we can configure with the security plugins. We also have traffic control plugins, and these are things like the ACL plugin, where we can configure special permissions to our users. Then we've got other plugins like serverless and analytics and monitoring. This is what I was discussing also at the last slide. This is really about making sure that we can monitor the results of our application and how it is behaving. We can apply transformations as well, and we can also register our logs in different ways in a file. We can send our logs to an HTTP server, we can send it to a Kafka log, or using Logly. So the API Connect Gateway does provide a lot of plugins that we can use to configure and protect this way the access to a particular website that we want to apply restrictions to it. All right, so we are wrapping up our Connect Gateway Manager video. We went through the basic plugins to provide basic authentication to our application and how to achieve some level of protection. This is to provide you with an easy step to get into this configuration world, and therefore make it easy to start using the Kong KONNECT Gateway Manager. I have done some work already about Kong in my own free time. You can find the work that I have created around the Kong Gateway in these 3 different repos. The one is by Audio Concert. That was the first project I did about Kong. It's an exploration project about the Kong Gateway without Connect. Then I have another project called Healthy Cameras, where I explore only the authentication aspect of the Kong Gateway. It includes an OAuth 2 mechanism implemented manually and using the OAuth 2 plugin, not to be confused with the OAuth 2 introspection plugin. And in that repo, I'm also including instructions to use an actual external OAuth 2 authenticator, in this case, Okta. Finally, I have a third project called Kong Test Drives, and this is a roughly loose project without any specific goal, just to explain small important details about the Kong Gateway or anything that I find interesting without following any specific order or any specific standard. It's just a pure exploration project, which of course has a tendency to grow a lot. Just to make it clear, this video has been made independently as a Kong champion, but I am not affiliated with Kong itself. If you enjoyed this video and you think it has been useful for you, please don't forget to leave a like, please leave a comment in the comment section, read the description for further details and further links for all the videos that I have mentioned, and don't forget to subscribe. And until the next video, have a good one. As a short disclaimer, I'd like to mention that I'm not associated or affiliated with any of the brands eventually shown, displayed, or mentioned in this video.